Hello there, I'm Erin Aid. This is Boom Bust, and these are the global financial stories we're tracking for you today. It's Tech Day here on Boom Bust, and we're kicking it off by taking a look at how the NSA wants front door access to your encrypted data, and they're asking congressional leaders to force tech companies to give it to them. I'll tell you all about that coming right up. Then renowned cryptologist Bruce Schneier is back on the show. He's telling us about some of the biggest threats to our cybersecurity today. And Boom Bust's favorite Jim Rickards is dropping by the studio later on. He'll be sitting down with me live on the show to give us a full update on the current state of the global currency wars. You definitely don't want to miss a moment, and it all starts right now. Last month, companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Google urged the Obama administration to put an end to the NSA's bulk collection of metadata. However, the National Security Agency wants red carpet, front door, butler-welcomed access to tech company data, and the NSA is willing to battle the big boys of tech in order to get it. Now, the NSA says that the government needs access to encrypted data on smartphones and other devices in order to track and prevent criminal activity. Congress is currently considering new framework for handling encrypted data. Leaders in the tech industry and advocacy groups say that government should not have complete unobstructed access to citizens' private communications, while government and law enforcement officials say that total encryption could stand in the way of national security operations. NSA Director Michael Rogers thinks he's found the solution. Listen to this. He says have tech companies create a master multi-part encryption key capable of unlocking any device. This way, if the key were broken into pieces, no single person would have the ability to use it. Mr. Rogers literally said, quote, "I don't want a back door, I want a front door, and I want the front door to have multiple locks." Now, Rogers believes that the adoption of front door access will allow for essential security measures while keeping data safe from hackers and an outside attack. To me, this seems not only a little misguided, but also somewhat pompous. What makes the NSA honestly think that no other government or cyber terrorist is capable of hacking something that they can? Also, isn't this an erroneous effort given that it was bad old U.S. policy that caused the freak computer bug currently plaguing millions of iOS and Android users today? Quick reminder about freak, by the way. Back in the 1990s, U.S. law demanded a weak version of website encryption so that it could break it whenever it wanted to. Now fast forward to today, and now the NSA wants a stronger encryption key that it can break whenever it wants to. Well, I say fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Bruce Schneier is back on the show today. Now, Bruce is a renowned security expert and the author of over 13 books. He's also a fellow at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard Law School. I first asked Bruce how much of a threat state actors are versus non-state actors in terms of security and privacy. Take a look at what he had to say.
I think state actors are providing an increasingly great threat. And whether it's countries like the United States or China, Russia, the UK, Israel, breaking into systems for espionage purposes, whether it's these countries subverting systems so they can break into them later, they are increasingly acting on the internet and doing things to each other and to companies around the world who are either targets or just in the blast radius. And the more the internet becomes this tool for geopolitics, the more I think we all have to worry that we're going to be affected by it, even if we're not the target of these attacks.
Now, let's talk about Apple Pay for a second. According to Apple's CEO, Tim Cook, Apple Pay is currently available in 700,000 locations. Now, Apple's new payment system, it uses near-field communication technology, or NFC. So can you explain to us what near-field communication technology is, and specifically how secure it is? I mean, like, a lot of people believe that Apple Pay is the new frontier for both crooks and scammers, so folks will want to know the technology it runs on is safe.
But actually, that's not true. What folks want to know is whether they will be liable for problems. So let's imagine the Apple Pay system is not very safe. There's fraud all around, but you're never charged for it. You actually don't care. Right? As long as you can pay for the things you want to pay for, and you're not charged for things you didn't, then the system's working. And in that respect, Apple Pay is a secure system. You're not going to be liable when there are problems. Now, the near-field communication is similar to Bluetooth. It's a close-range communication system. If you live in a city and you use a subway card that has a proximity sensor, it's like that. You're going to wave your phone near the sensor, and there'll be communications, and then payment will go through. And it's probably secure enough. I'm sure there's going to be fraud, but like most financial fraud on credit cards, you're not going to be liable. The system will absorb the costs. So in that respect, it is safe to use. I use it. I don't worry about it.
Now, in order to access Apple Pay, one's device requires both the new NFC embedded chips and Touch ID technology. Now, most people don't have these things, so isn't this kind of service limited in terms of who can use it?
But that's going to be true for all services. It'll be limited to those who have the hardware and software necessary to use them. As phones get replaced, every 3 to 5 years you're getting a new phone, you'll get these new technologies and you'll be able to use it. I mean, it's just like, remember when wireless started becoming ubiquitous in laptops? Some laptops didn't have that and they couldn't use wireless. Now everybody does. So there's always going to be a rollout phase. Apple decided that those pieces of hardware were essential for the security, so they're putting a floor. If you don't have that hardware, you can't do it. And, you know, in 5, 10 years, everyone will be able to.
This kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the interview, but I want to ask you about Hillary Clinton's email servers. Now, we kind of all know that our emails, they aren't private, and someone can always access them, whether it be your employer, your email provider, the government, whoever is keen to read them, they can get in, essentially. However, a small percentage of email users choose to run their own email servers in an effort to avoid giving anyone access to their emails, and Hillary Clinton was one of these people, and I know you are one of them as well. So, I mean, is this really a bad thing? In a quest for anonymity in today's digital age, do you think that we'll begin to see more and more people running their own servers?
I don't. Running your server is a niche thing. It's something only techies are going to do. And we don't really do it for security. We recognize that our email is insecure. Because even if I secure my email, you're not securing yours, and I'm corresponding with you. The reason we run our servers is because we want control over the system. Because we want to run our system our way, with our stuff, and we know how we like it. We don't want to use anybody else's server. And I think Clinton was doing the same thing. It was not about security. She knows that if she has something secure to say, she picks up the phone. She's not stupid. Running your own email server is about having control over your email environment and your email system. And that is more and more a niche thing. Most of us outsource our email to cloud providers because it's just easier. And that's not changing. I mean, as email becomes more ubiquitous, even more people outsource it to cloud providers. Running your own server is kind of a freakish thing to do.
Now, I want to turn now to the Internet of Things. Everything from your dishwasher to your car to your house, it can now fall under this kind of comprehensive notion of the Internet of Things. But, I mean, it stands to reason that the more devices and points of entry there are on a network, the more opportunities there are for an intruder to find a way into your world. So how secure is the Internet of Things?
I think we're going to see some large insecurities, that these systems tend to be low cost. They tend to not be built with security in mind. They tend not to be upgradable, which is going to be a problem. And I think we're going to see many vulnerabilities in our thermostats, our cars, our refrigerators, in medical devices. We're starting to see some of this now, but this is going to be a fruitful avenue for attack. If you think about some of the large-scale data breaches, Some of them came through point-of-sale terminals, which is the same thing. A thing that's not very well designed, that's cheaper, more ubiquitous, and attached to the internet. So I think this is going to be a new avenue of cyber attack and cybercrime.
So take your house off the nest is what you're saying, unless you really like the convenience of it. But I want to talk about the new cyber bug on the block. It's apparently known as Freak, and it's a dangerous security flaw that could open up many phones and other machines to attack. But here's the incredible thing about it. The flaw was actually created by the U.S. government back in the 90s in an effort to prevent consumers from having access to strong encryption. So do you think the U.S. government has learned from its mistakes, or is there need to continue to freak out?
You know, Freak is actually interesting. It wasn't really created by the government as a flaw. In the 90s, there were rules about cryptography export, that strong cryptography couldn't be exported. So U.S. products had two modes of operation, a secure domestic mode and a less secure export mode. And this Freak attack exploits that difference. That it turns out that you could force devices to use the more insecure mode. So you're actually causing them to default to a less secure operating mode. And there are lots of ways you'll see this sort of attack. If you think of a credit card, credit cards normally verify online, but if the phone isn't working for some reason, the vendor will often take the card anyway. That's the same sort of attack. Now, that's how this works. The origins were this idea that you could build two modes of a system, one more secure and one less secure. And I think governments are still trying to do that. They're still trying to build systems that have a less secure mode that in some ways can give them access. And I don't think governments are learning that this is a bad idea. I think it's a terrible idea. I think we need secure, secure by default, and secure only. And the more we can do that, the safer we'll be. So I do worry about these sorts of dual modes or backdoors in the future.
Time now for a very quick break, but stick around because when we return, Jim Rickards will be joining us live in studio. The best-selling author of Currency Wars is in town for the IMF meetings this week and is making time to sit down with us here at Boom Bust. Then in today's Big Deal, Edward Harris and I are rounding up and breaking down the very biggest tech stories from this past week. But before we go to break, here are a look at your closing numbers at the bell. Don't go anywhere.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. What is the state of Black America?
Like the rest of America, Black America in the aggregate is better off now than it was when I came into office.
Please somebody help us. Cause you can see I'm feeling helpless. And all them babies in them shelters. Man, we can't change the hand they dealt us. Help us. Help us.
People of America, when are you going to wake up?
This is all a setup.
We as the United States are supposed to stand for something.
It's easy to talk the talk, but do you walk the walk?
This former frogman is looking at you.
We're a frightened society today who turns to our government and says, make us safe.
Who's the real Wizard of Oz behind the curtain? Stay vigilant and question more. Question more.
If you want to know what's going on in your city, in your streets, never back down like Tyrell, and the truth is what you seek. To analyze, investigate from the bottom to the top. You speak your mind like Sean Stone, whether they like it or not. I got Tabitha, Miss Wallace, with the wisdom and the pearl. Between the outrage and the evidence, what's going on in this world? Watching the hawks, watching the hawks, watching the hawks. Listen when they talk.
Welcome back to the show. Joining us now in our D.C. studio is Mr. Jim Rickards, Chief Global Strategist at West Shore Fund and author of The Death of Money and Currency Wars, both amazing books. If you haven't read them, go out and do it. Now, Jim, I'm so glad that you're here today, and I want to start off by talking about the current development in the currency wars that we're in today. You know, the dollar, it's on a tear. The euro is weaker than it's been in months. So please give me an update on where the currency wars stand today.
Well, the currency wars are alive and well. As you know, Aaron, the currency war started in 2010. My book came out in 2011. But one of the points I make is that we're not always in a currency war, but when we are, they can go on for a long time. So I'm not surprised they're still going strong in 2015. I think I could come back a year from now and we'd still be talking about it. But the main fight now is the weak euro, strong dollar. The question really is, how much stronger can the dollar get? U.S. growth fell off a cliff in the first quarter. We're borderline recession right now. If the Fed actually does raise rates, I don't expect they will, and I've said that for a long time. But if they do and the dollar gets even stronger, you know, we'll probably go into a recession at that point. Emerging markets could be a catastrophe, not unlike 1997.
I'm glad that you bring up emerging markets, and I do want to get to that in a little while. But I first want to ask you, don't you think the fact that everyone is piling into one trade, that trade being shorting the euro, could potentially be a very bad thing? Yeah,
independent of the macroeconomic fundamentals between the euro and the dollar, whenever a trade gets that overcrowded, you know, people are desperate to make money. How do you make money in these sort of volatile, non-directional markets? Well, the answer is, you know, you find this trade. But if the euro starts to rally, which it could, I expect by September the Fed's going to blink and not raise rates. And when that happens, maybe they'll even start talking about QE4 in 2016. When that happens, you could see the dollar down, the euro go up, and a lot of these shorts will be running for cover. So it just adds the volatility.
Now, I'm glad that you bring up the Fed. It's like you already know my questions, Jim. This is amazing. But I want to talk just Tuesday. The IMF came out with their latest forecast, and they downgraded the economic forecast for the U.S. and raised the forecast for Europe and Japan. And obviously, this downgrade comes as a result of the strong dollar. So do you agree, first and foremost, do you agree with the IMF report that these things are all correct? And specifically, what does this report signal to you in terms of what the Fed will do next?
Well, it is interesting. First of all, the IMF has probably the second worst forecasting record of any major institution. The worst forecasting record is the Fed. So IMF is slightly, but they're both horrible. And you go back, look at their one-year forward forecast for the last 6 years. They were both wrong by orders of magnitude. I don't mean, you know, they say 3.3 and it's 3.2. It's like they say 3.3 and it's 2.8 or 2.6 or
way wrong.
Way wrong consistently. And there's a reason for that. They use equilibrium models. The world is not an equilibrium system. If you have the wrong model, you're going to get the wrong results. So first of all, I don't put much stock in it. But to the extent that they tweaked it a little bit, they lowered the U.S. probably not enough. U.S. looks like it's coming in around 0 for the first quarter. So I don't know where they get the numbers they've got. Now, the whole idea that the U.S. goes down, Europe goes up, well, that makes sense because of the currency wars, because of the weak euro and the strong dollar. But then they needed to get growth from somewhere, so they gave India another point. I mean, India is doing some things right, but I don't know. It almost was like a plug figure. And then I was struck by China, which they left unchanged since the last update. China is also slowing down significantly. So it's a little bit of, you know, I'm not saying they're cooking the books, but it's almost as if the overall figure was unchanged. Individual countries were up and down, but it's almost as if they struggled to keep that headline number unchanged. I think it's weaker than that.
Interesting. And the Fed, their reaction, you know, next meeting, are they going to raise rates? What do you think?
Definitely not raise them in June. I don't think they'll raise them this year. I don't see how. Here's the thing, Aaron. If they do, it's only because they've got the wrong forecast again. Why would you raise rates if we're borderline recession? Well, you wouldn't. But if your forecast was that we were going to have pretty good growth, you might raise them based on a forecast, bearing in mind the forecast is always wrong. So that would be a blunder. They would be raising rates in the face of a borderline recession. If they actually do that, I would say our stock market probably has no bottom. Emerging markets are even worse. You know, they've got $9 trillion of U.S. dollar debt. By raising rates, the other thing is, you know, they say, well, what they want to do is finesse it. They say, we want to raise it, but we're going to wait a really long time for the second one. It's like a little kid, give him a piece of candy, says, I promise not to take another piece of candy.
Promise.
But the problem is the markets are not that subtle. They're very blunt instruments. So they're going to accelerate the second, third, fourth, and fifth rate increases, and that's going to be the equivalent of a tightening. It's going to make a stronger dollar, probably weaker euro. Emerging markets will be in distress. It'll be a complete blunder. But I don't think it's going to happen, but it could.
Okay, now the IMF, they also came out and they said that the U.S. faces long-term challenges because of low population growth, which we know has been going on for a while, and also mediocre productivity gains. So how will these particular challenges play out in the currency wars, or do they even matter?
Well, they do matter because this is the real solution. I've been critical of the IMF models and forecasting, but I'll give them credit on this one. We are in a structural depression. We are not in a cyclical recovery. It's why growth is so weak. Growth is well below potential, well below. Short-term potential is probably 5%. Long-term potential is probably 3.5%. We're coming in around 2. We're way below potential. This is a depression. Depressions cannot be cured by monetary policy. They can only be cured by structural changes. The IMF did say that. Structural changes are things like investment, regulation, fiscal policy, et cetera. So I'll give them credit for recommending that. But, you know, Larry Summers said the same thing. The Fed, Bernanke, all said the same thing. The problem is structural changes cannot be done by central banks. They can only be done by legislatures and executives. Our White House and Congress don't even talk to each other, so we're not going to get the structural changes.
And I want to ask you about the strong dollar in relation to currency wars. You know, how does the ruble's 30% 2015 appreciation play into that? What does that have to say? Yes, they had, you know, one of the fastest falling currencies in 2014, but one of the fastest rising in 2015. So what does that mean? Well, you know, a lot of, Russian companies, I mean, if you're paying in rubles and the ruble gets cheaper, your sort of payroll just got cheaper. So that was actually a benefit for some of those companies. It depends if you're a lender or a borrower, you know, as the case may be. But look, Russia is the 8th largest economy in the world. They've got some fundamental strengths. They're the 1st or 2nd largest energy exporter. I know they're in distress right now, but they're not going to, you know, fall into the Arctic Ocean. And it's very apparent the sanctions are not working. We're not going to be able to toughen up on sanctions. And Putin has a lot of ability. We put sanctions on Iran, and they worked. We've put sanctions on Russia. Russia has a much greater capacity to push back against the U.S., so there's a limit on what we can do. The Germans don't want to be involved in sanctions. So I think, you know, Russia hit a bottom, but I actually recommend to for U.S. investors, some of these Russian ETFs. They've done very well, and the ruble's coming back. So. You know, is the strong dollar diminishing returns of the U.S. as the world's kind of primary growth engine? Will this really hinder that?
Absolutely. And you know, remember, the Fed started all this, go back to May 2013 with the taper talk, then they actually tapered in 2014, then they removed patience. They're going down a path where they say, we're going to raise rates. But why would you raise rates if the economy is weak? Well, you wouldn't. You would only raise rates if you think the economy is strong. So the idea was the U.S. economy is strong enough to bear the weight of the world. We're going to bear the whole cost of global adjustment. Hey, Japan, you get a lifeline with a cheap yen. Euro, you get a lifeline with a cheap euro. We'll have the strong dollar because we're big and strong. But we're actually not. The U.S. economy is very weak. So this is the conundrum the Fed has. They say they want inflation at 2%. That's their goal. They say they want to raise rates. Okay. But if you raise rates, it makes the dollar stronger, which is deflationary. So how does that work when your goal is inflation? The answer is it doesn't work. It only works if you have very strong growth, but we don't. So this conundrum is coming to a head. They're not going to raise rates in June. July, unlikely because there's no press conference, no meeting in August. So September is the crunch time. I think that's when they'll blink and make it clear that they're going to be very patient.
Very patient. We'll end at that, Jim. Always such a pleasure having you here in studio and just having you on in general. So thank you so much for your time, and good luck this week.
Thank you.
That was Jim Rickards, best-selling author and chief global strategist at West Shore Funds. It's time now for today's Big Deal. Jim Rickards, what do you think, Ed? Good guy?
Yeah, it was different than we probably anticipated.
Absolutely. Yeah, there were some, unsuspected answers, which is always fun. And know what? I hope there are right now in the Big Deal. So we want to talk tech, because it is Tech Day, one of our favorite days. But I understand that you have a question for me, Ed, so kick it off, man.
I do. And the question that I have for you is, I know that you and Bianca had mentioned to the team about Equal Pay Day, and I felt like we should cover this. Okay, so here's my question, and a long lead up to that question.
Okay.
Pew Research looked at pay data, and from what I saw, they ascertained that a huge percentage of the pay gap between men and women is due to career choices and family decisions that end up hurting pay for women. The pay gap between young men and young women is then only 7%. The question for me is this a glass half full kind of statistic in your view?
You know what, this Pew, I'm glad that you found this because you showed this to us, and this was a really interesting study because it's not what I normally see. And I have to say, I walked away from it feeling, yeah, it's just the glass is half. I'm not going to say full or empty, just that's what it is. Because, you know, this Pew Research, it estimates that based on hourly earnings, that's what they took their data from, that full-time and part-time workers found that women earned 84% to what men earn, and that's different because you always hear, you know, 70 cents on the dollar. So this is a big difference. And you know, they also approximated that it would take 40 days into the year at that rate to earn what men earn, opposed to today. And the reason this is equal pay day is because basically you'd have to work. It took this many days into the year for me to start getting paid, if this data stands true compared to you, for men and women. But that isn't the case, according to Pew. And also, the thing that made me think of the glass just half, not full and not empty, was that young women, this was interesting, their pay gap, the wages there, was at 93%. So women make 93% of what men made. So they've caught up pretty fast. And I don't know exactly. I think only time will tell how this will play out. But it was somewhat hopeful to me in the sense that at least younger generations are seeing a closing of this gap. Will that change when they hit age 35? Potentially, but I don't know. We'll see.
We shall see, yes. Okay, I think I have another question for you here. The question here is, you know, I'd love to go into a little bit more about this, but because we have lots of time, but here's the new question. You ran across a Wired article on simple tools that make it possible for anybody to make robots. Sounds cool, but how does this really work? Yes, this kind of fascinated me. It's called, the company that's doing this is the Hybrid Group, and essentially they're making open source, so open code. You can, if you want a robot that ties your shoes, for example, and that's just your idea, and you're not a coder, they want to create a platform where you can go in and kind of plug and play to create a robot that ties your shoes. And I'm just saying ties your shoes. It can do anything that you dream of. And it kind of reminds me of when, you know, I think of when I was planning my wedding and I had to make a wedding website, and I'm not a coder and I was terrified of it, but it was almost more like an arts and crafts project thanks to some of these websites that are available where I could just, you know, pick things in and I didn't need to code. This guy and the Hybrid Group are trying to do that with robots, which is pretty spectacular, and I don't know if it'll work or if it will be as easy as my wedding website, but I'd like to think so, that we could have all of this one day. Yeah, and so, you know what? Let's turn the tables now, Ed.
Right.
Yeah, I did a lot of talking today, more than I like to, but let's talk about HBO.
Okay.
This is big news this week, and you know, they're cord cutting, they're all about that, and HBO is now available as a standalone channel on your Apple, you know, box top little guy, that Apple TV thingy, your tablet, your phone, whatever device you want to watch on. So the big question, Ed, you know about cord cutting, you are our cable guy. Should I go ahead and get it?
Yeah, if you're a Game of Thrones person,
Huge,
go.
love Game of Thrones.
Actually, you know, I heard that Game of Thrones got 8 million viewers on its first episode, even though some of it leaked online. But you know, that's one of the big draws for HBO as a standalone. I wouldn't do it because I don't watch HBO. I don't watch TV practically except for sports. But I would say, yeah, go for HBO alone.
You know what? I would have to say, if I was single, I would 100% cut the cord. And I know that's a crazy thing to say, but my husband makes a lot of our cable decisions, and you choose your battles wisely in a marriage. So
if he's watching this, cut the cord.
Cut the cord. But I think if I was alone, I would definitely not. I don't need all those sports. He's like you. That's what he keeps the ESPN for. But we'll see what happens. I'm sure we'll talk about this again. We're out of time. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Ed, we'll get back to this soon. But that is all for now. However, we love hearing from you, so please check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/BoomBustRT. And you can also tweet at us, at Aaron Aid, at Edward NH. From all of us here at Boom Bust, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.